Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK, and I'm joined by my PRWeek colleagues, Siobhan Holt, deputy editor, and Evie Barrett, deputy news editor. Hello both. How are you today?
Good, thanks, John. Yourself?
Really good, thank you. Really good. And Evie?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy times.
Very busy times. So we're going to get onto that right now. We're casting our eyes over some huge news in agency land. Let's start with Omnicom, where it was announced last week that Golin and Ketchum are to merge. Siobhan, what are the details here?
Omnicom announced a major reorganisation of its PR agencies, so that was Golin and Ketchum to merge, which would create a single agency, they said, with integrated offers across brand, comms, health and social. The name, as yet, of this combined agency is a work in progress, according to Chris Foster, CEO of Omnicom Public Relations. As part of the changes, Matt Neal, who is the current Golin chief executive, is going to become CEO of the newly combined organisation. And then another change we'll see is that Porter Novelli will become a dedicated brand within FleishmanHillard, and JJ Carter is going to continue to lead Fleischmann as president and CEO. In the UK, they're saying that there's no changes to Weber Shandwick or Portland. Foster said at the moment Weber is not up for sale, they were his words. And the current UK leadership across the PR agencies remains in place, but it is understood that the structures are being reviewed. So it's one to watch and see, John.
Yeah, so obviously huge news. What's the industry been saying about this?
As you can imagine, I'm sure there's some scepticism from our PR professionals. One source told us that any merger takes years to fully integrate, and during that time there'll be some real disruption for clients. And they also questioned what added value there will be given the similarities in offer and client base of both, say, Golin and Ketchum. And obviously they also raised the prospect of further redundancies this year.
In terms of clients, it does feel like conflicting clients could be an issue down the line. I mean, Golin and Ketchum both have big consumer practices, traditionally worked with quite high-profile brands. I mean, for example, McDonald's and Wendy's, the two fast food brands, I believe, are both clients of one of the agencies in the US. So you do wonder how they're going to navigate things like that. Chris Foster, when he was asked if the Ketchum brand would survive long term, he said that he liked it and the intent is to try and maintain all the goodness and equity in that brand. He wants a Golin Ketchum naming construct, but is going to put some thought into that. It does raise the question, though, if you want to keep both brands, is there any benefit in merging them, really?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as I say, many of the professionals that we spoke to highlighted the risk to clients, as Evie said there, and jobs. Investment analysts do predict that the US agency will make significant number of role reductions in 2026, although Omnicom has said predictions of major cuts are speculation and inaccurate. But Chris Foster, when the merger news was announced, said that staff were laid off at Omnicom PR agencies in recent weeks. However, he attributed those to cuts announced when the IPG acquisition was finalised last December. He said that it had worked itself through. He said he didn't expect that to increase after those conversations. And in terms of specific layoff numbers in the Omnicom PR business, he said he wouldn't give details on stats, people's jobs or careers.
Obviously, there has been, as you say, quite a lot of scepticism, but frankly, there often is around these things, isn't there?
There is.
And I'll say that for balance, Chris Foster said, our client work will continue without interruption. Clients will continue to keep working with the agency brands they know with the same teams and day-to-day relationships. He also said Omnicom will, quote, address any concerns clients have about conflicts under the merger, client by client, in partnership with them. For the most part, clients have generally been receptive to this. So anyway, I saw somebody describe this merger as PR's worst kept secret. Were both of you surprised when the announcement came?
No, not. To be honest, I wasn't. I mean, I slightly agree that it was the worst kept secret in PR. There was a lot of gossip, a lot of speculation. I think every type of merger option before this had been mentioned to the PRWeek editorial team. And also, I think even though at the time, I think it was Wren that said that he was happy with PR and that he wasn't going to make any changes. I don't think anyone really believed that, because even just looking at, say, WPP's merger, it was kind of inevitable that Omnicom was going to make these decisions. I mean, no other holding group has around 13 agencies on his books. So I think that PR was always going to be reviewed.
Yes.
So it didn't come as a big surprise to me.
No, I mean, I guess the sort of counter argument to that would be they were very quick to announce the combination of various ad agencies. And also, John Wren was kind of speaking quite positively about PR's performance recently. When the news was announced, the final merger actually happened of IPG and Omnicom in December. So I guess that is one sort of slight caveat. What do you think, Evie?
Yeah, I mean, as Siobhan says, there'd been all sorts of whispers, but in terms of the timings, these things do seem to pop up out of the blue a lot of the time. I mean, the fact that the details, such as the name of Golin and Ketchum, as it's being called at the moment, hadn't been worked out, does kind of make you wonder if they maybe weren't ready to announce it yet and maybe had other plans down the line, but here we are.
Well, sometimes there's the impact of the market. I mean, a lot of the time at the moment, the markets want to see things are happening. They want to show action, which is why they were very quick, I think, to emphasise that they were making changes in the ad agency side of things. We've got to remember that PR is a relatively small part of this whole of Omnicom's whole business. So well under 10%, maybe 7 or 8% off the top of my head. So I think you can see why this announcement probably hasn't had that much impact, I would argue, on Omnicom's share price, not this announcement specifically, whereas obviously what it was doing with its huge advertising agencies is a different kettle of fish. So I guess you could argue they've maybe had a bit longer, the markets have given them a bit longer to work out what to do with PR than they had with the ad side of things maybe. But moving on, I mean, let's talk about this a bit more. In your view, is this a good move by Omnicom, this specific merger, Ketchum and Golin?
I think it's too soon to say. From a PR perspective, we look at these decisions from talent, how will this impact clients, we focus on the agency leaders, and also we maybe view it more from, which agency is the most awarded. And obviously that's not how holdcos in the US are looking at the division. They're focusing on cost-cutting measures, the bottom line, and what's best for shareholders, etc. So for me, I think only time will tell if these decisions work. I'm mainly concerned about, are we going to lose the talent from the sector? It's an opportunity for mid-sized agencies to hire. I just hope that they have the foresight to do that.
And the funds.
Yes.
I think it comes back to the point that Jim Donaldson, obviously ex-FleishmanHillard boss, made in the feature we wrote about whether the biggest holding companies are really focused on PR or if they're just kind of fighting to survive more broadly. The market capitalisation of Omnicom today after the merger with IPG is, quote, pretty much the same as it was before they joined forces, he argues. So yeah, it really does depend which lens you view it through. To Omnicom, this probably does seem like a good business move, but it will inevitably cause some headaches in the day-to-day processes while things are being figured out. But hopefully they'll learn from the formation of Burson last year on kind of what to do and not do.
Interestingly, I was speaking to a couple of in-house people about this as well at some recent PRWeek events about what they think. And, I think obviously it's difficult to generalise about the whole in-house world, but I think for a lot of people, it's a bit of a shrug, really. And actually maybe a bit of annoyance that ultimately it means more paperwork. Some people they've trusted who might be leaving or moving to different roles. And actually they don't necessarily like that disruption. So I think in the short term, that could be a problem, that basically you've created another job for the in-house teams to do. So that's not insubstantial in the scheme of things. But ultimately, obviously, Omnicom is looking to the longer term here and the cost savings they can make and also being a bit leaner and meaner, I guess they might put it.
And obviously for balance, Omnicom would say that they're really ensuring that they're not causing that challenge for clients and that, the aim is to integrate across the business in a way that will make it more efficient, I presume.
Yes, and also a lot of the job cuts, as Chris Foster was alluding to, had already happened and have been happening over several months. So this isn't like one day you've got your trusted account director and account execs and account managers and so on, and then the next day they're gone. This has been a phased process. So obviously it's been a sort of leadership. You would hope have been sort of doing that in a sensible way that means clients haven't been left in a difficult situation, I suppose.
But you're right, though. We do see it quite often, don't we, that the big accounts move and they usually maybe follow someone that they trusted, that they've worked with for a long time. It happens regularly.
It is a risk. I also think that, that question of, would this be a good move? I find it's the sort of question that's almost impossible to answer because this business, cliche time, it is a people business, isn't it? I mean, That is your asset. I mean, you don't have any other assets really other than your brand, which is in itself driven by how good your people are. So if, the new Golin and Ketchum gets some good people in, that will in turn mean they get some good clients. I'm sorry if this is very obvious to everyone listening, but it's true. This isn't an industry that has these like amazing fixed assets that just have sort of value outside of the current workforce. There's every chance that they might get these people in and they'll be really good. But it certainly creates a lot of challenges and I'm looking forward to seeing how things play out over the next few months. In other big news from Omnicom, you alluded to it earlier, Siobhan, Porter Novelli is going to be incorporated into FleishmanHillard. What do you make of this news? Were you surprised at this?
I wasn't actually surprised at that news, but coincidentally, I actually spoke to Jim Donaldson, who was the UK and Middle East CEO of FleishmanHillard until 2023, and obviously knows a thing or two about mergers. But when I spoke to him, he argued that there was a certain inevitability and a very typical holding company logic in taking Ketchum and Porter Novelli and subsuming them into a stronger, more successful network, as he claimed. And then also, when he was commenting on FleishmanHillard and Porter Novelli, he predicted the sector will see secondary brands quietly disappear into 2 to 3 years as well, which he described as a little sad. And I have to agree with that. I think that could be what we see here.
Yeah, well, I mean, he'd have first-hand experience of that. I mean, it was quite a few years ago now that Omnicom agency Fishburne Hedges was merged into FleishmanHillard to create FleishmanHillard Fishburne. And then a few years ago, the Fishburne bit was removed. So it is what tends to happen.
And it shows as well with that this could take a very long time before we actually get the agency settle into what we may know it as, that it could go through quite a few iterations.
It could do. Then again, Ketchum is absolutely huge, isn't it? I mean, Fishburne Hedges was a very well-respected agency, but it wasn't anywhere near the scale of Ketchum, which is, a global powerhouse and has been for many years. Having said that, I mean, if you look at the WPP example, they got rid of the Conan Wolf and all of these historic sort of stalwarts of the PR agency scene. So I guess it shows holding companies aren't necessarily beholden to these names, even if they are huge and sort of historic like that. So we will see.
I saw someone on LinkedIn say no agency brand name is safe now, just from kind of a legacy perspective. But in terms of FleishmanHillard and Porter Novelli, I can understand the logic here much more than Golin and Ketchum, I'd say, particularly from a UK perspective. I mean, Golin, Ketchum, Fleischmann are all kind of a similar size, whereas if you look at our top 150 rankings, Porter Novelli was the 40th biggest last year compared to the others kind of ranking between 10th and 20th roughly. So Porter Novelli is a decent creative agency, but it is a much smaller operation. So I think it makes sense to bring in their talent and their client base to boost Fleischmann's performance. But yeah, it does seem almost inevitable that everything will sort of blur into one and that branding may be lost eventually.
I think it leads really well, that point, into the next question. One thing we noticed, the public affairs agencies appear for now to be left alone in this, and a lot of those are smaller. Can you see why? Or is that a strange move, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just a case of them having not gotten around to it yet. As you were saying, the ad agencies were obviously the biggest priority in terms of having an impact on stock market and things like that. Then the major PR agencies, and then I'd say public affairs shops last. I mean, there's no way that they'll keep 6 or so public affairs firms in my view, but I do think from a UK perspective it's interesting because obviously we only really have Portland, so I don't know how that would play out globally.
I've got a slightly different view on this. I think there was a real opportunity here to have, say, a Portland or the other handful of public affairs specialists that they have, to make them the sort of public affairs specialist division of one of these new agencies. And one thing we've noticed in this industry, I've noticed in the 10 plus years I've written about it, is particularly when times are challenging and difficult and there's a lot of change, you tend to get those agencies that combine really good corporate and really good public affairs growing together. And quite a lot of agencies, big integrated agencies, combine corporate and public affairs as a sort of mega division. And it feels like that would be a reasonably obvious move in my mind to incorporate those together. Then again, it might be down to the individual situations at these different agencies. It might be that they feel they've got enough talent in those sectors currently in those agencies that aren't the sort of public affairs specialists. So maybe it was that was the reason for leaving them alone. But it did slightly surprise me, if I'm really honest.
At the same time, there is value in having a smaller player within a massive group. I mean, if you look at WPP with Clarion, that's obviously a much smaller PR agency than Burson or Ogilvy PR, but they still see the value in having that alongside the huge operations.
That's true. I'm also not sure you get many global strict public affairs specialists. It sort of goes down to what you say. I mean, there's something about public affairs, and maybe this is a really obvious point. You need to know about the politics of that particular country. I mean, you can't just get someone who's an expert in lobbying in Westminster, just transplant them to Australia or the US, and they'll immediately get all of the nuances of the political scene there. I mean, obviously there is crossover and there are things you can learn from all of them, but maybe there is a sense of public affairs isn't combined as easily as other parts of the comms and advisory world, perhaps. Okay, I'm going to move on to other big news or potential news that's been happening in the world of agency giants. Burson. There was a suggestion in the Financial Times last week that WPP could possibly look to sell Burson a little more than 18 months after the agency giant was formed, of course, from the merger of BCW and Hill & Knowlton. According to reports, the company plans to consolidate its ad agencies into a new division called WPP Creative that would go alongside WPP Media and WPP Production. It's not clear where Burson would fit, hence the sale rumours. WPP isn't commenting on the reports, incidentally. I've been looking into this and sounding out some experts, and there are some really mixed views, I would say. Emil Bielski, a strategy consultant and former chief executive of Spark Foundry, told me there is logic to WPP selling Burson to the highest bidder. It shows a willingness to fundamentally change the nature of the holding company versus simply providing a new wrapper. He said the new CEO, Cindy Rose, will, quote, need some bold moves ahead of reporting to the markets at the end of this month. This could well be one of them. As many of you will know, WPP's share price and performance has been in decline for some time, and there's a sense that Rose needs to be shown to act. There's obviously a parallel here with WPP selling FGS Global, the corporate and financial comms behemoth, to private equity group KKR in late 2024. But Joe Hine, who's an M&A expert at SI Global, cautions against these comparisons. He said a sale of Burson is, quote, very different prospect to FGS. He said the market for PR, while still substantial, does not have the strength and opportunity of strategic communications. Neither does it have the margins. And this is an important point, I think. We've done some research recently on operating margins as part of our Companies House Files report. What we found, operating profit margins at FGS in 2023 were 21.1%. Now, the most recent equivalent for WPP's PR division, which is mostly Burson, is roughly half that, 11.6% in the first half of 2025. There are questions really then about who would buy the business. I wrote in my article that it's difficult to think of a single example of a global integrated comms agency combining the whole gambit of corporate, consumer, public affairs and more being sold as a standalone in recent years. And actually, Andrew Block, the former Frank PR boss and advisor to M&A company PCB Partners, told me a sale of Burson isn't implausible, but it feels more medium-term than imminent. He said it's a, quote, very large, operationally complex business and not an obvious or an easy carve-out. And, quote, valuation expectations are likely to be a sticking point. On the flip side, some might see Burson, which has a huge scale and massive clients, as a great opportunity for scale and investment. What do you think WPP will do? Do you think it will look to sell Burson, and do you think it should?
I'm sure it's at least considering that as a possibility, seeing as we haven't had confirmation otherwise. If you look at Omnicom saying it has no plans to sell Weber Shandwick, it seems quite sure in that. It's hard to imagine with the restructure, as you say, John, that WPP would turn down an offer if someone was keen to buy it. But yeah, I just don't know who that would be. At the same time, I do think, as I was saying with Golin and Ketchum, what is the point in creating such a massive PR agency if you don't have a place for it and purpose for it? I can understand the difficulty in knowing what to do with it because it's so huge. And especially as WPP also has Ogilvy PR, which seems to be doing particularly well and has quite a laser-focused mission and USP, I'd say. I imagine there are conversations going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Burson, it's funny, isn't it? Because, as we know, it's a little over 18 months, that merger, which was arguably the biggest in the PR industry perhaps ever, went ahead. So it would seem strange to then shift it off. Having said that, we are under a new regime now. Cindy Rose has come in and is under a lot of pressure to make changes. So maybe some sort of relatively sharp U-turns as far as the business is concerned might not be totally out of the question. So I don't think it's inconceivable, but I do think there are barriers there. I also think there's a sense that from a more kind of cultural point of view, quite a lot of people at Burson, particularly if they're involved in the sort of the creative side, they might feel that there is more, that they're better suited in a big holding company that is dominated by advertising and creativity than being part of a private equity or another buyer, where maybe they'd feel a bit more out on their own. On the flip side, you could imagine that some people might think, well, it's quite hard to get investment given the share price at WPP and the fact they got their debts and all the rest of it, and maybe having some private equity backing might mean some fresh investment that could really benefit them. So I can see arguments on both sides, really. What I can say is that all eyes will be on WPP on the 26th of February when any news about the restructure and or sale of Burson is expected to be announced alongside the 2025 financial results. Final question I thought I'd ask, and this is one we were discussing in our meeting earlier on today, actually, with the team. Do you think holding companies really care about PR?
It's a big question. As I said before, I think their priorities are the bottom line. Shareholders is, what did you predict? Was it 7 to 9% of the business between that? Roughly. It's not going to be their main priority. So maybe, I think quite often PR probably is overlooked. And, if you're senior account exec, you're going to feel that it's a difficult situation to be in. And I know when I look at it, my sympathy does lie with the members of staff because, they're probably not being told the information first. It's a lack of information probably makes it quite a scary place to work sometimes, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy for people at these agencies now, and obviously there have been some redundancies, a fair number, and it goes without saying that people shouldn't. I really hope people take that as just the market working the way the market does and not anything about, themselves. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of other opportunities in the sector for those people. So, all the best to them. I remember I met Martin Sorrell once when he was still at WPP, and it was at an event, and I didn't have very long to talk to him, like literally just a fleeting hello. And I asked him one question. Martin, I just wrote about WPP's results. At the time, PR was about 10% of the business. And I said, well, so PR is about 10% of your business. What proportion of your time do you spend thinking about PR? And he said, about 10%. And I sort of think that kind of sums it up.
Yeah.
I think PR needs to be realistic about how far up the level of importance it is at holding companies, given it's not a priority. But then again, you can make yourself a priority. If you become profitable, particularly, if you become something that becomes an amazing asset, then the bosses are going to take note. I don't think there's an intrinsic bias against PR. I just think they're looking at the parts of the business that are biggest and that are earning the most money. I mean, I'm sure WPP were very happy that FGS Global was as profitable as it was when they sold it and managed to get, $1.7 billion for it. So yeah, I think that was probably a time when they appreciated what that did for them. So I sort of think, in a way, although I did ask the question, it's not an entirely fair question because, this is business. I don't think they've got any sort of misty-eyed kind of longing to have, for example, historic holding agency names there for the sake of it. Everyone's got to sort of prove their worth, but it's up to the agencies to sort of show their worth as much as anything else, I would say.
Yeah, and we know that PR is essential and advertising is, parts of it are moving to take the slice of PR cake, shall we say. Evie wrote about that this week. Evie, do you want to talk about which story I'm referring to there?
Yeah, so we saw this week that the renowned ad agency Uncommon Creative Studio had launched a PR arm to, quote, carve out new space in a tired category, which obviously is a bit of a loaded statement and maybe shows that not everyone in the industry has the same perception of PR as PR professionals do. But I think there is clearly value there, and the fact that they're kind of coming for PR shows that the work our industry does is worthy and desirable.
There's also a sense of they would say that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
If they're launching a new business. And my perception of people in Adland is they do like to sort of give some punchy comments and all that sort of stuff. Not that our industry is averse to such things at times, as we know. But I do think that's a fascinating story about Uncommon. And I'm really interested to see how that business performs and how it all works in the wider marketing communications mix. Okay, that's all the time we have this week. Thanks to Siobhan and Evie. And thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.